New York, this is Democracy Now!
President Trump, the people of Israel and the state of Israel will be forever indebted to you for your magnificent efforts on our behalf. I want to thank, too, the King of Morocco, King Mohammed VI, for taking this historic decision to bring a historic peace between us.
In a deal brokered by the Trump administration, Morocco and Israel have agreed to establish diplomatic relations. At the same time, the United States has agreed to become the first country in the world to recognize Morocco's sovereignty over occupied Western Sahara, what many consider to be Africa's last colony. Morocco has occupied much of the resource-rich territory since 1975 in defiance of the United Nations and the international community. We'll get a response from leading Palestinian and Sahrawi figures. Then we'll look at Joe Biden's pick to head the Pentagon, retired Army General Lloyd Austin, who now serves on the board of Raytheon.
America is strongest when it works with its allies. And over the years, I've worked hand in hand with our diplomatic colleagues and partners around the globe and witnessed firsthand what we're able to accomplish together.
If confirmed, General Austin will become the nation's first black defense secretary, but it remains unclear if he'll be able to secure a needed waiver from Congress due to laws designed to preserve the civilian control of the military. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. An advisory committee of U.S. vaccine experts voted Thursday to recommend emergency use authorization of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine, with the Food and Drug Administration poised to issue its approval Saturday. Once that comes, some 2.9 million doses will be shipped to sites across the United States, with the initial limited supply of the vaccine rationed for healthcare workers and nursing home residents. On Thursday, the U.S. recorded another staggering toll from COVID-19, with over 224,000 new infections and nearly 3,000 deaths. Robert Redford, director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, warned for the next 60 to 90 days, the U.S. will likely see more COVID-19 deaths per day than the number of people killed in the September 11th attacks.
It's also very sobering to realize that in the United States today that COVID-19 now is the leading cause of death, surpassing heart disease.
That was Robert Redfield. Meanwhile, a CDC official told lawmakers earlier this week she was instructed by CDC Director Robert Redfield to delete an email from the Trump administration which sought to alter a scientific report on the risks of COVID-19 to children in order to better match Trump's messaging on reopening schools. In New Hampshire, an autopsy reveals State House Speaker Dick Hinch, a Republican, died of COVID-19 Wednesday. His death came 1 week after he was sworn in as New Hampshire's top lawmaker at a December 2nd ceremony. The event was attended by several Republican lawmakers who revealed just 1 day prior that they'd tested positive for coronavirus after attending an indoor meeting in late November where many people refused to wear masks. New Hampshire State Representative and ophthalmologist Dr. William Marsh blasted fellow Republicans, tweeting, quote, "Those in our caucus who refuse to take precautions are responsible for Dick Hinch's death," he said. New Hampshire Republican Governor Chris Sununu also criticized members of his own party Thursday.
You don't wear a mask and social distance just for yourself. You do it for those you're surrounding yourself with. And for those who are out there doing just the opposite, just to make some sort of bizarre political point, it's horribly irresponsible. It really is. And it has horrible consequences.
The Labor Department reports nearly 1.4 million U.S. workers filed for initial unemployment assistance last week, a sharp rise from the previous week, as the worsening pandemic continues to hammer the U.S. economy. The latest figures come as 12 million unemployed people are set to lose all their benefits at the end of December, and about 19 million people are currently unable to pay their rent, with the CDC's moratorium on evictions set to expire on New Year's Day. The Washington Post reports a sharp rise in hunger and homelessness across the United States has led to a spike in shoplifting, with staple foods like bread, pasta, and baby formula in heavy demand. On Capitol Hill, Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell Thursday rejected a bipartisan framework on a pared-down $908 billion coronavirus relief bill, saying it does not provide enough liability protection for corporations whose workers or customers became infected with COVID-19. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders blasted Republican lawmakers for failing to provide for Americans in desperate need of assistance. Sanders introduced an amendment to a spending bill that would provide a $1,200 stimulus check to every working-class U.S. adult and an additional $500 for each child. Congress must pass the spending bill by midnight tonight to avoid a federal government shutdown. Sanders spoke from the Senate floor Thursday.
At a time when so many American families are suffering, when so many people don't know how they're going to feed their kids, or prevent being evicted from their homes, or how they're going to pay for a doctor's visit, we cannot leave Washington and return to our families unless we address the economic suffering that so many other families are facing.
Morocco and Israel have agreed to establish diplomatic relations as part of a U.S. brokered deal. Morocco becomes the fourth Arab nation to establish ties with Israel since August. As part of the deal, the United States agreed to become the first country in the world to recognize Morocco's sovereignty over occupied Western Sahara, what many consider to be Africa's last colony. Morocco's occupied much of the resource-rich territory since 1975 in defiance of the United Nations and the international community. Thousands have been tortured, imprisoned, killed, and disappeared while resisting the Moroccan occupation. After headlines will get a response to the Morocco-Israel agreement from leading Palestinian and Sahrawi figures and go inside occupied Western Sahara. Azerbaijan's military held a massive parade in the capital Baku on Thursday, celebrating its victory over Armenian forces in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who backed Azerbaijan in the war, was on hand for the parade, which featured a display of Turkish armed drones. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International report both Azeri and Armenian troops committed war crimes during the 6-week conflict, with evidence of extrajudicial executions, beheadings, torture, and the desecration of the bodies of slain soldiers. Back in the United States, President-elect Joe Biden told civil rights leaders in a private conference call Tuesday that he would use his executive authority to undo many of President Trump's actions, but would not take executive action to implement a progressive agenda. An audio of the call leaked to The Intercept. Biden said using his executive powers to enact policies like a ban on assault rifles would be way beyond the bounds of his constitutional authority. Biden also asked civil rights leaders not to pursue campaigns to transform policing in the United States until after twin Senate runoff elections to be held in Georgia January 5th, which will determine the balance of power in the Senate.
They've already labeled us as being defund the police. Anything we put forward in terms of the organizational structure to change policing, which I promise you will occur, promise you. Just think to yourself and give me advice whether we should do that before January 5th, because that's how they beat the living hell out of us across the country, saying that we're talking about defunding the police. We're not. We're talking about holding them accountable.
Meanwhile, President-elect Biden has tapped Susan Rice to be director of the White House Domestic Policy Council. Rice served as U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and national security advisor under President Obama. Critics called out the pick over Rice's inexperience with domestic policy, as well as her role supporting U.S. military actions that caused devastation in Syria and Libya under President Obama. The position does not require Senate confirmation. In related news, Biden's picked another Obama administration alum, former White House Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough, to lead the Department of Veteran Affairs. Veterans groups expressed disappointment Biden did not pick a veteran to serve in the role. Jeremy Butler of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America told the Washington Post, quote, "He's starting in a position of public deficit because of who he is not." Meanwhile, a watchdog report has found current VA Secretary Robert Wilkie and other senior leaders discredited and smeared a House aide who reported a sexual assault at work. Andrea Goldstein, who issued the complaint, said in a statement, quote, "The millions of women and men who've experienced or witnessed sexual violence in the military recognize Secretary Wilkie's actions as horrifyingly familiar, refuse to take or enforce accountability, blame, shame, and make the victim the problem." A majority of House Republicans have backed Trump's last-ditch effort to overturn the election results by asking the Supreme Court to toss millions of votes in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Georgia, all states that voted for Biden, as part of a Texas-led lawsuit. 106 House Republicans signed on to a legal brief Thursday in support of the lawsuit. State Department Inspector General Matthew Climo stepped down Thursday after Mike Pompeo lashed out at a report in which the watchdog found Pompeo's wife did not secure proper approval for documentation for trips she took with her husband as part of the official State Department business. The investigation, however, cleared Susan Pompeo of violating federal ethics rules. The Supreme Court ruled unanimously Thursday 3 Muslim men who were placed on a no-fly list can sue government officials for damages. The plaintiffs say the FBI placed them on the no-fly list as retaliation for refusing to spy on their communities, which prevented them from making trips to Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Yemen, harming their reputations and their jobs. The latest acting head of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Tony Pham, is stepping down after less than 5 months in the role. During his tenure, he oversaw the installation of billboards on Pennsylvania highways with the faces of immigrants who, according to ICE, quote, pose a public safety threat. And in Indiana, officials at the federal prison in Terre Haute injected 40-year-old condemned prisoner Brandon Bernard with a lethal dose of pentobarbital Thursday evening. The execution on International Human Rights Day came after the Supreme Court declined to intervene to halt the 9th execution of a federal prisoner this year. The Trump administration plans to kill 4 more prisoners before Joe Biden's inauguration. To see our coverage of Brandon Bernard's case and Trump's lame duck executions, the first time in 130 years, you can visit our website, democracynow.org. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Morocco and Israel have agreed to establish diplomatic relations as part of a U.S. brokered deal. Morocco is the 4th Arab nation to establish ties with Israel since August. As part of the deal, the United States agreed to become the first country in the world to recognize Morocco's sovereignty over occupied Western Sahara, what many consider to be Africa's last colony. It's due to open a consulate in the occupied city of Dakhla, where there are few, if any, U.S. citizens. Morocco's occupied much of the resource-rich territory since 1975 in defiance of the United Nations and the international community. Thousands of Sahrawis have been tortured, imprisoned, killed, and disappeared while resisting the Moroccan occupation. Following Morocco's invasion in 1975, about half of the Sahrawi population fled to neighboring Algeria, where they have lived for the past 45 years in refugee camps in the middle of the desert. The deals come less than a month after a nearly 3-decade-old ceasefire ended in Western Sahara. In November, the Moroccan military broke into a no-go buffer zone in southern Western Sahara to attack Sahrawi civilians, blocking off a Moroccan-built road and exchange fire with the Polisario Front, the Sahrawi liberation movement seeking independence. Morocco since intensified its repression in occupied Western Sahara, raiding and laying siege to the homes of pro-independence activists and journalists police arresting dozens of people and cracking down on protests. Human rights groups criticize the U.S. Morocco-Israel deal, which was announced on International Human Rights Day. In Washington, Democratic Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont said, quote, after losing his own bid for re-election, President Trump cannot, by proclamation, negate international law or the rights of the people of Western Sahara. They're entitled to what they have long been promised, a free and fair vote on self-determination. In 1991, the United Nations promised Sahrawis a referendum on self-determination as part of a ceasefire deal, but Morocco has blocked the referendum from happening. Bassem al-Sahi of the Palestine Liberation Organization also condemned Morocco for joining Bahrain, Sudan, and the United Arab Emirates in establishing ties with Israel despite the ongoing occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. He said the deal is unacceptable and warned it will embolden, quote, Israel's belligerence at its denial of the Palestinian people's rights. We're joined right now by Hanan Ashrawi, the longtime Palestinian diplomat and scholar. She recently resigned her position executive committee member of the Palestine Liberation Organization. She was the first woman to hold a seat in the highest executive body in Palestine. She's joining us right now from the West Bank. We welcome you to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us. If you can start off by talking about the Morocco-Israel part of this deal.
You.
Hanan Ashrawi, it's great to have you with us.
Thank you. It's good to be with you, Amy. I can't hear you.
So if you can start off by talking about Morocco's recognition of Israel and what this means for the Palestinians.
Well, this is part of a whole pattern of behavior, a process whereby the U.S., the Trump administration, I don't want to say the U.S., has been acting as the errand boy for Israel in order to try to get as many victories, as many benefits, as many privileges for Israel. And right now it's rushing like mad in a race against time before they leave office, in order to reposition Israel, to normalize relations with the Arab world, and to deliver Palestine to Israel, and to legalize or legitimize the occupation of Palestine and the land theft of Palestine and the escalation and the, annexation of land, as well as the building of settlements and so on. So this pattern, in many ways, utilized very not just illegal but cruel means. I said it's between bribery and blackmail. And it uses the weak spots in different countries and the needs of different countries in order to supply them on behalf of Israel and extract concessions for Israel. Now, look at the UAE, look at Bahrain, who's also normalized with Israel and is in trouble. Look at now Morocco. Now, the instability in many different countries, look at Sudan, of course, which is another tragic case, was exploited. And the weakness of certain, the needs of certain regimes and rulers were also exploited in order to extract these privileges and so on for Israel and reposition it as a major power in the region, and to give it a free hand and to enable it to be part of what they call the Sunni moderate bloc in facing Iran and the Shia. Now, with Morocco, it's different from the issue of Sudan and the Gulf countries, because Sudan, of course, needed to be removed off the terrorist list and needed the blockade to be lifted. Morocco wanted the U.S. to recognize and accept its control and its annexation, control over and annexation of the Western Sahara. And the different countries in the world, the UN and so on, do not recognize Moroccan control or annexation of the Western Sahara. Neither did the U.S. This is a change in U.S. policy, and it's a violation of UN resolutions that granted the Sahrawis, the Western Sahara, self-determination. In the same way as the Palestinians are every year told that they have the right to self-determination but with the implementation, we never get it. So this has created, again, a situation of quid pro quo where the U.S. exploits the weakness or the avarice of other countries in order to bring them to normalize with Israel and in order to break Arab ranks, to destroy the Arab Peace Initiative, to violate successive Arab resolutions, and to place Israel in the heart of the region as a major economic, military, security power. Now, Morocco, grantedly, there's an article in the New York Times, I think today, has been cooperating secretly. The Moroccan regime, I don't want to say the people, because the Moroccan people are among the most supportive of the Palestinian cause. And they're extremely patriotic and extremely, they identify with Palestine. So they're very unhappy with what's happening. They're very unhappy with the normalization with Israel. And they know that normalizing with Israel means normalizing the occupation, means normalizing lawlessness. It means that they are giving Israel a free hand to continue with its policies against Palestine. And we are seeing how in these last days of the Trump administration, Israel has escalated and intensified its settlement activities, its home demolition of the Palestinian people. It's superimposing an apartheid system now totally on the West Bank in particular, and its illegal annexation of Jerusalem, and creating rings of settlements to isolate Jerusalem and to fragment the West Bank, knowing that it has the blessings of this U.S. administration and knowing full well that destroys any chances of peace in the same way as it destroys the chance of having a viable, territorially contiguous Palestinian state.
So what exactly does it mean, Hanan Ashrawi, to have Bahrain, Sudan, the United Arab Emirates and Morocco recognize Israel? How does that change things on the ground for Gaza and the West Bank?
It just emboldens Israel even further. It's not a question of recognition or making peace, as the Trump administration claims. There was no war. I mean, they don't share borders with Israel. They've never had a war with Israel, neither Morocco, nor the Emirates, nor Bahrain, nor Sudan. So in a sense, what they're doing is looking for any place where they can make peace or where they can have agreements and normalization, as they say, in order to say they made peace. And you see, the Palestinian question is not central and is not a prerequisite to peace, and the Arab Peace Initiative is no longer applicable, and that Israel can have all the fruits of what is called peace and normalization without having to pay its dues in terms of compliance with international law. So this, of course, does weaken the Palestinian position. The U.S. administration has taken several unilateral and illegal steps in order to bash the Palestinians into submission, and it failed. It says, now it's very clear that they have fragmented the Arab position. They have created and enhanced fault lines within the region. They are supporting a sort of artificial polarization, and they are creating further rifts between the people and their leadership, and they are supporting more autocratic or despotic regimes. And we think that the Trump administration has been acting like one, and outside the law, so to speak. So now, of course, the Palestinians know that this weakens their hand. They know that this, in many ways, undermines the Arab unanimous support for the Palestinian cause. The regimes themselves may have taken such self-serving and illegal positions, but the people, the Arab people as a whole, remain committed and remain supportive of the Palestinian cause. Now, Israel feels that it is not only above the law, that it can do whatever it wants, but it has partners in crime. First, it was the American administration that entered into collusion or complicity with the U.S. administration and with Israel. Now it is dragging Arab countries or Arab leaders in order to do the same. And it went so far as the Emiratis have been signing agreements with the settlers and with the settler business groups. And we keep reminding people settlements are illegal. They are a war crime. according to the Rome Statute and the ICC, and anybody who cooperates or supports or aids and abets a war crime can be held accountable as well. But they're moving so fast and they're creating situations that are so volatile, I think, that they will introduce more instability in the region. It is an abnormal situation. It is a result of specific needs. It was the need for Netanyahu to be able to get re-elected. It was the need for Trump to say he's a peacemaker before November. Now it's a question of fulfilling requirements in order to appeal to his constituency, whether it is the extreme right-wing Zionist evangelicals or whether it is the pro-Israel lobby or whether it is his funders like Sheldon Adelson and others. This has become a pattern that is very disruptive, that is illegal in many ways, and that has placed the U.S. outside the realm of peacemaking or recognition and of an adherence to international law and UN resolutions.
Hanan Ashrawi, can you address why you stepped down from the PLO leadership? Explain your decision.
Okay, well, I did issue a statement and I did speak out, but it's a question of actually fulfilling not just a promise but a pledge. It is practicing what you preach in many ways, in the sense that I believe it is time for the PLO to be reformed, for the institutions to be rejuvenated, for the democratic process to take place, to have elections and to elect new leadership, particularly young men and women, and to reform the system, and of course to respect our institutions and their role. There have been several instances and issues, which I don't want to discuss, right now, but I did discuss them with the president, that I felt have weakened and undermined the standing of the PLO and our decision-making, and continued continued the rift, which was not in our benefit, and it had weakened the Palestinian position internationally and in terms of standing up to Israeli violations. So there's a long list of things, but I feel it's time. And I've been trying to leave for some time now. And I wanted to practice what we call the graceful exit in order to make room for others. And perhaps this will trigger others or trigger more reform or trigger the meeting of the institutions of the PLO in order to elect new leadership. And we do need elections and a genuine revitalization of the system and an exercise of democracy.
Finally, can you address the issue of the pandemic, COVID-19, in the occupied territories? You tested positive for COVID. You have Saeb Erekat, the chief PLO negotiator, who died of COVID. Can you talk about the situation and how you recovered?
Certainly. It's really drastic. It's extremely dangerous. We have lockdowns every weekend, but that's not enough. There is no movement between different districts and so on, but the situation is rapidly threatening to get out of control. Actually, nobody still has any vaccine or medicine, but the thing is, we are under occupation. We do not control our borders, our crossing points, entrance and exit. Israel controls everything. And as such, in many cases, people who come in or go out and so on are subject to Israeli control and what Israel does and says. And therefore, we were unable to control our borders, and the workers who go to Israel or Palestinians from Israel who come to visit families and have social occasions, because we are one people, the indigenous Palestinians in Israel, we call them the 48 Palestinians. So it has created a situation where there is really no control, and we don't have a health system, despite the fact that we have very qualified doctors and a Ministry of Health that has been working extremely hard to try to control it. It did at first. It acted quickly it controlled the situation, and then with the second wave, it became worse. And now we're going through the third wave, where every day we have more than 2,000 cases, and we have deaths by the scores, which, given the number of people we have, is a very high ratio. And we don't have enough health facilities, the hospitals, and even the swabs, the needed treatment medicines.
So let me ask you then, the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, says he will be the very first person to get a COVID vaccine, to be injected with one. What will happen to the Palestinians? What kind of access will you have?
What kind of what? Sorry.
Access to vaccines will you have?
Yeah, well, the president has been talking to many different countries, and every time he addresses a leader of a country, like in Russia and other places, he does ask for the vaccine. And the Ministry of Health has been in touch with the pharmaceutical companies that are manufacturing this vaccine. So we have to get it ourselves, and we have to pay for it. But at the same time, we're addressing other countries to be able to help in terms of acquiring the necessary vaccines. We don't expect to get them soon. We don't have the means to buy enough for the whole population. So I think there will be several countries that have volunteered to help, to assist, but it means we'll have to wait a while to be able to get it. And the fact that it is becoming more prevalent, it is spreading quite rapidly. I was talking to the Minister of Health, Dr. Mai. She's quite a hardworking, excellent health practitioner, and she told me that they're desperately trying to get enough, and she's in touch with many different sources, and we hope through the WHO and others there will be help. But they're worried that if we do not get it quickly, the hospitals and the ICU facilities will not be enough to take care of them. We do have good and qualified health service providers, and we trust them, but at the same time, we don't know if they can cope with the scope of the spread of the COVID-19 in Palestine.
Dr. Hanan Ashrawi, we want to thank you for being with us. Palestinian diplomat, scholar, recently resigned her position as executive committee member of the Palestine Liberation Organization, the first woman to hold a seat in the highest executive body in Palestine, also served as the official spokesperson of the Palestinian delegation to the Middle East peace process. She herself had COVID and now has recovered. When we come back, we go from the Israel-Morocco alliance to the U.S.-Morocco alliance, to the U.S. acknowledging, to the U.S. recognizing the sovereignty of Morocco over Western Sahara, the first country in the world to do so. Stay with us.
Matan a mi hermano africano, colgado de un árbol en Santiago. Matan musulmanes sin razón. I know, noticiero te mintió. Quizá no te contó, the story was never told. And here it on CNN, heard it going to the store. Donde el bodeguero say salam aleikum, but he talked dominicano. Sold me a Lucy, now he got me thinking Americana. Excuses they be using to account for their abuses. Like we the criminales, while they robbing the market. Not the quick trip, this bigger business. Burning and looting, more like shooting, bombing and pillage. Villages targeted by vigilantes, funded in part with the tax on your purchase at your local market. Well, let's go to the very core, the reason for our discord. What do they want us for? Beyond serving their wars and working to keep it churning, so mama can buy us churnings, consumer cause that ain't worth it. Tattoo our souls is worse than walking barefoot on coast. I get the Lord, but I know it hurt more to grow up poor. So tell me what's real violence, allow me to redefine it. When quality of life get defined by your whiteness, access limited, only VIP get in, and then your money still defining who you're going to be.
Ghetto Pueblo by Multiply. This is Democracy Now!, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Morocco and Israel have agreed to establish diplomatic relations as part of a U.S. brokered deal. Morocco, the fourth Arab nation to establish ties with Israel since August. As part of the deal, the United States agreed to become the first country in the world to recognize Morocco's sovereignty over occupied Western Sahara, what many consider to be Africa's last colony. It's due to open a consulate in the occupied city of Dakhla, where there are few, if any, U.S. citizens. Morocco's occupied much of the resource-rich territory since 1975 in defiance of the United Nations and the international community. Thousands of Sahrawis have been tortured, imprisoned, killed, and disappeared while resisting the Moroccan occupation. Following Morocco's invasion in 1975, about half the Sahrawi population fled to neighboring Algeria, where they've lived for the past 45 years in refugee camps in the middle of the desert. The deal comes less than a month after a nearly 3-decade-old ceasefire ended in Western Sahara. Joining us from Spain is Maaloud Saeed, a representative in Washington of the Polisario Front, the Sahrawi liberation movement seeking independence. Also with us in the United States, Stephen Zunis, professor of politics and international studies at the University of San Francisco, the co-author of Western Sahara, War, Nationalism, and Conflict Resolution, Irresolution. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Stephen Zunis, if you can make that link between Morocco recognizing Israel and the U.S. in exchange, it seems, officially accepting Morocco's annexation of the occupied Western Sahara.
It was clearly a quid pro quo, though the United States has been, in effect, supporting Morocco's occupation for many years, just as it has been supporting Israel's occupation for many years. Trump, in both cases, has gone well beyond what previous administrations of both parties have done, and violated long-standing international legal norms. In the case of Palestine, recognizing Jerusalem as solely Israel's capital, moving the U.S. embassy there, and recognizing Israel's illegal annexation of Syria's Golan Heights. In the case of Morocco, it's even worse, because it's not just talking about recognizing an illegal annexation of a portion of a country, but an annexation of an entire country. And in the case of Western Sahara, remember, Western Sahara, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, has been recognized by over 80 nations around the world and is a full member of the African Union. In a sense, Trump is now recognizing the takeover of one African nation by another. Again, this is unprecedented since the signing of the United Nations Charter for the United States, or any nation really, to recognize such a brazen violation of international legal norms.
I wanted to go to Madrid, Spain, to get the response of Maaloud Saeed. You represent the Polisario Front in Washington, D.C., though you're in Spain right now. Can you talk about what this means? The Trump administration doing something that has not been done by any country in the world, recognizing the annexation of Western Sahara. What does this mean for the Sahrawi people?
Good morning, Amy, and thanks for having me. The Sahrawi government condemns and regrets this decision taken by President Trump, which breaks away from all the previous administration policies. But this decision is not going to change the fact that the Sahrawi Republic is a full member of the African Union, that Morocco occupies part of this territory, and it's not going to change the nature of the conflict. This decision, it was done without advancing any legal argument, because they will not find it anywhere. And Western Sahara is not just a piece of real estate that President Trump can give. It's a territory that belongs to its people and a full-fledged member of a continental organization. Like it was very well said by Professor Zunis, this is the first time that a country is trying to ignore another member state as if the African Union did not exist, as the Sahrawi Republic is not a member of the African Union. And so this is really something that we condemn this position, but it's not going to change on anything the situation, because the Sahrawi people are going to continue with their struggle. We are not going to stop. And this is, you say this is the first power that recognizes, it's the first power that violates international law bluntly in the Western Sahara. And because of it, since it's a violation of international law, it's not going to have any effect on the issue. By the way, already the European Union came up with a statement disassociating itself from this decision and the United Nations. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the senators that acted so promptly and members of Congress, in particular Senator Jim Inhofe, Senator Patrick Leahy, and Congressman Elliot Engel, the chairman of the International Relations Committee, Congresswoman Betty Colum, and others that they disassociated themselves, and some of them, they even condemned this kind of decision.
I wanted to go right now inside occupied Western Sahara to El Ayoun to speak with Nazha El Khalidi, who is inside her home, where many are in their homes, but police have laid siege to the area. And Nazha, I wanted to welcome you to Democracy Now! You're a journalist as well with Equipe Media. You've been arrested by the Moroccans. Can you respond to the Trump administration recognizing Morocco's sovereignty over your territory and what this means for you? What is the situation inside?
Thank you very much, Amy Goodman, and thanks to Democracy Now! For talking to us and give to the Sahrawi activists from the occupied territory of Western Sahara the opportunity to share their stories and to share testimonies of victims. Regarding the situation in the occupied territory, there is a major crackdown on the Sahrawi rights, on the freedom of speech, on the freedom of movement, on the freedom of assembly, especially after Morocco violated the ceasefire and the war start again. Morocco started a wave of arrests against Sahrawi activists in the occupied territory. The oppression and the repression against the Sahrawi peaceful movements raising day by day, and Morocco keep arresting people. Now they are dozens of Sahrawi activists who are behind bars in Moroccan prisons. The people in Western Sahara are not allowed to express themselves. There are no press agencies in the ground that can document the violations against Sahrawi human beings in here. Morocco is continue closing the territory in front of the international observer, international activists, and international journalists. So we determined and we described Western Sahara as a black hole, as it was described by RSF reports 2 years ago, and by international organizations. It's completely closed, and we are suffered in silence. Regarding the Donald Trump recognition, we believe that this will not erase our legitimate right to freedom and independence. Sahrawi people is continue struggling, and we are not surprised since we have been betrayed by the international community for over 30 years, where we were waiting for a peaceful solution from the United Nations that we have been promised by the United Nations. And there is a mission to organize a fair referendum and to offer the opportunity to Sahrawi people to vote and to determine their own future by themselves. So we are not surprised by the recognition from Trump. And I think the statute of Western Sahara is already determined by international law, so not by a tweet of a president who is already in his way out. So the international law is clear and is set out in successive United Nations Security Council resolutions that were authored by the U.S. itself and that Western Sahara's statue will be determined by a referendum. We hope the incoming Biden administration will return the U.S. to a nation that respects long-standing international law and that will use its influence to encourage the meaningful, the United Nations lead peace talks on Western Sahara that have been neglected. We hope that the new U.S. administration will resolve the long-standing conflict in Western Sahara and help deliver what the Sahrawi people have long been promised by the United Nations, which is promised to give them a simple right, which is the vote for our freedom. So the Donald Trump recognition will not stop the Sahrawi struggle and will not end the Sahrawi beliefs in achieving legal rights and fighting for legal rights, which is independence, and establish their state on their land.
Finally, I wanted to ask Steve Zunis about this latest report in Reuters that talks about the U.S. planning to sell negotiating the sale of at least 4 sophisticated large aerial drones to Morocco. Not clear whether it is related to this, though it's coming at the same time. And you have the longtime supporter of Israel, the outgoing congressman, head of the House Foreign Relations Committee, Eliot Engel, while applauding the relationship between Jerusalem and Rabat, warned the Trump administration against casting aside legitimate multilateral avenues of conflict resolution, doing something no other country in the world has done. Professor Zunis, you have 30 seconds.
The drone sale is of concern because it's illegal for the United States to support to provide invading armies with this kind of sophisticated equipment. But now that Western Sahara is recognized as part of Morocco, suddenly it's an internal conflict. And so this paves the way for this kind of equipment, which could be used in counterinsurgency situations. In terms of Engel, it's important that someone who is so strongly pro-Israel is willing to break with the administration on this point. The question is what Biden is going to do, because Biden could reverse the annexation, recognition of the annexation with a stroke of a pen, but he'd be under a lot of pressure because then Morocco could use this as an excuse to nullify their recognition of Israel. So Biden's going to be in a lot of pressure by pro-Israel groups not to rescind Trump's order. So it's good that you have somebody like Engel who is challenging the Trump's decision.
And finally, Maaloud Saeed, the status of the ceasefire between Morocco and the Polisario. Since
the Moroccans crossed the buffer zone, and this was stated by the President of the Sahrawi Republic, Mr. Brahim Ghali, we say that the ceasefire was over, and therefore we're back to square one, to the situation in which we find ourselves in 1991. So right now there is the war going on from the south of Western Sahara till the north, from Gargarat to Mahdes. So the ceasefire is not anymore, it's over. Now it's just a war that will continue until the final liberation of the remaining part of the territory. And it's sad that this decision by Mr. Trump comes at the day of the international, the day that everybody was celebrating the human rights, the anniversary of the Human Rights Declaration.
Maaloud Saeed, I want to thank you for being with us, representative of the Polisario Front in Washington, D.C., Professor Stephen Yunis from the University of San Francisco, and Sahrawi journalist Nasla El-Khalidi. Thank you so much for being with us from occupied Laayoune. Coming up, we look at Joe Biden's pick to head the Pentagon, a retired general. What does this mean? Stay with us.
Nos une, rebelión de octubre, dignidad nos constituye. Octubre, rebelión, con honesta convicción, octubre, rebelión, se lucha desde el corazón. Pactaron silencio, firmaron un acuerdo, escondieron documentos. Dime tú quién es violento, mientras nuestros muertos sin justicia ni presos. Vamos a quebrar silencio y la vida alzaremos. Rebelión de octubre, nuestra América nos une. Rebelión de octubre, dignidad nos constituye. Octubre, rebelión, con esta convicción. Octubre, rebelión, se lucha desde el corazón.
Ana Tijoux here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we turn to look at President-elect Joe Biden's nominee for Defense Secretary, retired four-star Army General Lloyd Austin. If confirmed, he would make history as the first black defense secretary. General Austin can only be confirmed if, first, a waiver is secured from Congress due to laws designed to preserve the civilian control of the military. Several Democratic senators, including Richard Blumenthal, Tammy Duckworth, John Tester, and Elizabeth Warren have indicated they would oppose granting a waiver to Austin. 3 years ago, 17 Democratic senators voted against giving a waiver to General James Mattis when he was nominated by President Trump. Now there's speculation some Democrats may vote against the waiver for Austin, but for his confirmation, while some Republicans may do the opposite. This comes as General Austin also faces scrutiny for his ties to weapons manufacturer Raytheon, whose board he sits on. For more on Lloyd Austin's nomination, we go to Walpole, Massachusetts, where we're joined by Andrew Bacevich, president and co-founder of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft and a retired colonel and Vietnam War vet. Professor Bacevich is Professor Emeritus of International Relations and History at Boston University. It's great to have you back. Why don't you talk about your concerns about the general being the defense secretary?
Well, the general's not a civilian. And it seems to me if we're serious about civilian control of the military, and we should be as citizens, that we ought to have a bona fide civilian in charge of the Pentagon.
So this goes back to 1947. Explain the law passed by Congress.
So that was the National Security Act of 1947, which created the modern national security establishment, unified the armed forces, created institutions that we're familiar with, such as the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and created the position of Defense Secretary. This was under Harry Truman's administration. Truman himself was acutely sensitive to the importance of maintaining civilian control. And therefore, the creation of this reform in establishing the position of Defense Secretary, he was emphatic. The law is explicit that it'll be filled by a civilian. There have been two exceptions. The first occurred in 1951. This is during the Korean War, great military crisis. General Marshall, George Marshall, became Defense Secretary. The waiver allowing him to do that was approved. And then a second time, as you just mentioned, was just recently with the appointment of General Mattis to serve as Defense Secretary by Donald Trump during the Trump presidency.
And talk about what civilian control means. I mean, for a lot of people, they may just say, so it's the Pentagon. Why wouldn't you have a general?
Yeah, I was just yesterday, I reread President Eisenhower's famous farewell address. This is the speech where he warned about the influence of the military-industrial complex. And there's a phrase he uses. He's addressing his fellow citizens. about the imperative of being watchful over the military to ensure that liberty and security may prosper together. And as I've thought about that, it seems to me that military professionals have a rather specific understanding of what liberty and security mean and what they require, and that we ordinary citizens actually have a different understanding. Doesn't mean that ours is necessarily right, but I think the point is that we need civilian control in the form of a genuinely civilian defense secretary. For the defense secretary, in a sense, to serve as our agent to try to ensure that the military's understanding of liberty and security aligns with our understanding of liberty and security. And that's why I got nothing against Austin. I think he's probably a good guy, a patriot, served honorably. But I have serious doubts that he has that appreciation for what liberty and security mean in the larger sense. And that's why I think his appointment is a bad idea.
You've also expressed concern about, what General President Eisenhower talked about, that military-industrial complex. But you said that he jumped on the military-industrial gravy train too soon.
Well, in a way, it's hard to criticize Austin for this because so many of them do it. I mean, the 3 stars, the 4 stars, as soon as they retire, they start cashing in. And we've got these defense contractors, for whatever reason, welcome the retired generals and admirals to their boards. And that's what Austin did. He's only been retired for, I think, 4 years? He's made a ton of money. The money comes from defense contractors. I find that all ethically very troubling, even though I have to acknowledge that what he did was not legally wrong. And frankly, what he did is what so many of the rest of them do. But it is indicative of this incestuous relationship between defense contractors and senior members of the officer corps. And we ought to be uncomfortable with that, even though we've come to accept it as, I guess, the way things are.
I wanted to switch gears a bit and ask you about the Cost of War project at Boston University that came out with this new study that shows that the number of Afghan civilians killed in airstrikes led by the U.S. and allies have risen by 330% since 2017. We also just reported on 2019 alone, about 700 people were killed by airstrikes carried out by the Trump administration. And just yesterday, the report out of Jalalabad, the television journalist Malalai Maiwand was assassinated with her driver as they were on the road. What is happening in eastern Afghanistan?
Well, I think there's been a bit of a charade going on. I don't mean eastern,
but all of Afghanistan.
Yes. I think there's been a bit of a charade going on. It really precedes Trump, but continues under Trump, that the so-called endless wars are coming to an end. And the evidence for that is that the number of U.S. troops in Afghanistan and in other theaters of war has been going down. And when the number of troops go down, U.S. casualties go down, and the American public simply tunes out. Well, what has gotten less attention, but that Cost of War report invites us to pay attention to, is that as troop levels go down, reliance on air power goes up. Reliance on air power goes up. Even in a time of precision munitions, you're going to end up killing more civilians. And that is, in fact, what has happened. And it ought to be exceedingly troubling, except for the fact, as I suggested, the American public's attention to wars involving the United States is determined by the number of U.S. troops that are being killed or being wounded. And right now in Afghanistan, that number is very small.
10 seconds. Do you expect Biden to be different when it comes to Afghanistan?
No, I think he is going to take office and say, I will end endless wars, and he will maintain so-called counterterrorism capability, small number of troops, continue to use air power. So the endless wars in places like Afghanistan will continue. I think that he'll be putting his reform program at home in jeopardy if he doesn't bring these wars to an end.
Andrew Bacevich, I want to thank you for being with us, president and co-founder of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, retired colonel and Vietnam War veteran. That does it for our broadcast. Special thanks to Maria Carrion. Democracy Now! Produced with Renee Feltz, Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Libby Rainey, Nermeen Sheikh, Maria Tadasena, Carla Wills. I'm Amy Goodman. Wear a mask. Stay safe.